The pounding rattled my doorframe at exactly 6 in the morning, jolting me from a deep sleep. I opened it to find a deputy sheriff standing on my porch, stone-faced, handing me an eviction order for the house I had bought and paid for myself. I assumed it was a clerical error until my eyes snagged on the names listed as the petitioners. It wasn't a bank. It was Derek and Marlene Cox, my own mother and father. The pounding on my front door did not sound like a delivery. It did not sound like a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar or a friend stopping by with news. It sounded like violence. It was a heavy, rhythmic thudding that vibrated through the floorboards of my bedroom and rattled the picture frames on the hallway wall. I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was gray and dim, the sun barely hinting at the horizon. I squinted at the digital clock on my nightstand. It was exactly 6 in the morning. I threw off the quilt, stumbling slightly as my feet hit the cold hardwood. My brain was still thick with sleep, trying to make sense of the noise. Who would be hammering on my door at this hour? I grabbed my robe, wrapping it tight around my waist, as if it could offer some kind of armor against whatever was waiting on the porch. I hurried down the hall, the pounding stopping just as I reached the living room. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw a silhouette. It was broad, tall, and imposing. I flipped the deadbolt and cracked the door open, leaving the safety chain engaged. A man in a tan uniform stood there. The patch on his shoulder read, Pine Hollow County Sheriff. He looked tired, his eyes scanning a clipboard before shifting to my face. "Leah Cox," he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any morning pleasantries. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. "Is something wrong?" He did not answer. He simply reached into a satchel at his hip and produced a thick envelope. He slid it through the crack in the door. "You are being served with an eviction order," he said. "You have a lockout date scheduled for 14 days from today." I froze. The words made no sense. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. I looked at the envelope in my hand, then back at him. There must be a mistake. I stammered, my fingers trembling as I undid the chain and pushed the door fully open. "I own this house. I bought it 3 years ago. I have the deed. I have never missed a mortgage payment in my life." The deputy looked at me with an expression I would come to know intimately over the coming weeks. It was a look of bored pity. It was the look of a man who saw tragedies every day and had learned to stop caring about the details. "I just served the papers." "Ma'am," he said, already taking a step back off the porch. "If you want to contest it, you need to contact the Merrow County Civil Court. The number is on the paperwork. But I am the owner." I shouted, panic sharpening my voice. "You can't evict me from my own house." "Have a good day, ma'am," he said, turning his back on me. He walked down the driveway, climbed into his patrol cruiser, and drove away without looking back once. I stood there in the doorway, the morning air biting at my bare ankles. The neighborhood was silent. The birds were just starting to sing. It was a beautiful, crisp morning in Redmont Ridge, the kind of morning I usually savored with a cup of coffee on this very porch. Now, the world felt tilted on its axis. I looked down at the paperwork. My hands were shaking so badly the text blurred. I forced myself to focus on the header. Notice of eviction, petition for removal. My eyes scanned down to the line labeled petitioners. I expected to see a bank name, maybe a mistake by the mortgage servicer, maybe a scam artist I had never heard of. Instead, I saw 2 names that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. Derek Cox and Marlene Cox. My parents. I stumbled back inside and kicked the door shut, locking it as if that could keep the reality out. I sank onto the entryway bench, staring at the paper. My parents were evicting me. My parents, who lived 40 minutes away in the city. My parents, who I had not asked for a single dime since I was 22 years old. The confusion burned off, replaced by a cold, sharp terror. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my phone off the counter. I dialed my mother's number. My fingers were clumsy, missing the digits twice before I got it right. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello? Leah." Marlene's voice was calm. It was terrifyingly calm. It was not the voice of a mother answering a frantic call at 6 in the morning. It was the voice of a woman who had been waiting by the phone. "Mom," I gasped, clutching the counter for support. "A deputy was just here. He gave me eviction papers. It says you and Dad filed them. What is going on? Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me someone stole your identity." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint hum of the television in the background. She was watching the morning news. "We warned you this would happen." "Leah," she said. Her tone was flat, rehearsed. It sounded like she was reading lines from a script she had memorized days ago. "Warned me," I shouted. "Warned me about what I own this house. You can't evict me. I don't understand what is happening. Why would you do this? You have been impossible to live with," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "We tried to help you. We tried to be supportive. But you are ungrateful. You take, and you never give anything back. We had no choice." I stared at the phone, my mouth hanging open. "Impossible to live with Mom. I haven't lived with you in 10 years. I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and confusion. "I live in my own house, in Redmont Ridge. You have visited me here exactly twice." "What are you talking about?" "We are done discussing this. Leah," she said, "the paperwork explains everything. You need to be out by the date listed. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Mom, wait. Do not hang up on me." The line went dead. I called back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. I stood in the center of my kitchen, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee maker blinked its green light, waiting to be started. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but it felt like a stage set that was about to be struck. I needed to go to work. The thought seemed absurd, but the habit was ingrained. I worked as an office manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. People relied on me. If I stayed here, alone with these papers, I felt like I might shatter into 1,000 pieces. I needed routine. I needed the mundane reality of spreadsheets and coffee orders to anchor me. I showered in a daze. I dressed in my gray slacks and a blue blouse, the same outfit I would have worn on any normal Tuesday. But when I looked in the mirror, my face looked pale and waxy. My eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with shock. I drove to work on autopilot. I didn't remember the turns. I didn't remember the traffic lights. I just remembered the feeling of the steering wheel under my palms, the leather cold and hard. When I walked into the office, my boss, Sarah, was already at the front desk sorting through mail. She looked up and smiled, but the smile faltered when she saw me. "Leah, are you okay? You look like you have seen a ghost." I froze. I couldn't tell her. The shame was a physical weight in my gut. How could I explain that my parents were evicting me? It sounded like something a teenager would say. It sounded like I was a failure who had been leeching off my family, not a 33-year-old woman who had built a career and a life. I forced a smile. It felt brittle, like it might crack the skin of my face. "I am fine," I lied. "Just a paperwork mix-up with the bank. It kept me up all night. You know how bureaucracy is." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Oh, I hate that. Well, let me know if you need to step out to make some calls." I walked to my desk and sat down. But I couldn't work. I stared at my computer screen, the cursor blinking at me. My mind kept replaying the conversation with my mother. "We warned you." They hadn't warned me of anything. We hadn't even spoken in 3 weeks. The last time we talked, it was about the weather and my cousin's upcoming wedding. It was polite, distant, but as I sat there, older memories began to surface. I remembered the car they bought me when I graduated college. It was a generous gift, or so I thought. But then, every time I couldn't come home for a weekend, or every time I made a decision they didn't like, the car became a weapon. "After we bought you that car, you can't even drive down for Sunday dinner." I remembered the time my father offered to help me with my taxes. He held on to the documents for months, making me beg for them back, telling me I was too disorganized to handle my own finances. Their help always came with strings. It was a fishing line with a hook buried in the bait. You took the help, and then they reeled you in whenever they felt your independence drifting too far away. But this was different. This wasn't guilt-tripping me about a missed dinner. This was legal action. This was my home. At noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I told Sarah I was taking a long lunch and drove back to the house. I needed to see my files. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I ran inside, kicking off my heels, and went straight to the small filing cabinet in my home office. I pulled the folder marked House. I spread the documents out on the dining room table. The deed, the mortgage payoff statements from the bank, the homeowner's insurance policy, it was all there. I traced my finger over the deed. Grantee Leah Cox, sole owner. I breathed a sigh of relief. It had to be a mistake. Maybe they were evicting a tenant from one of their rental properties and put the wrong address. My parents owned a few duplexes in the city. Maybe they just mixed up the paperwork. But then, as I shuffled through the stack, a piece of paper slipped out that I didn't recognize. It was a single sheet, thin and cheap. The header read, "Notice to quit." I picked it up, my heart starting that terrible hammering rhythm again. It was dated 2 months ago. It claimed that I, the tenant, had been given 30 days to vacate the premises due to lease violations. I had never seen this paper in my life. I had certainly never received it. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. There was a signature line. Above the line, it said, "Received by Leah Cox." And there, in blue ink, was a signature. I stared at it. It looked like my name. It looked like the way I wrote my L's, with a sharp loop at the top. It looked like the way I crossed my X at the end, but it wasn't mine. The curve of the A was too round. The pressure was too even, lacking the quick, jagged flow of my natural hand. It was a forgery. A good one, practiced and careful, but a forgery nonetheless. I felt sick. I felt physically ill, as if I had eaten something rotten. Someone had signed my name. Someone had created a paper trail that said I had been warned, just like my mother said. I grabbed the papers and shoved them into my bag. I didn't eat lunch. I drove straight to the county courthouse. The building was a monolith of gray stone, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I waited in line at the civil clerk's window for 40 minutes, tapping my foot, checking my watch. When I finally reached the glass, the clerk looked at me with the same weary expression the deputy had worn. "I need to see the file for case number CV24890, I said. Sliding the eviction notice under the glass, she typed slowly into her computer, chewing on her gum. "Cox versus Cox," she asked. "Yes," I said. She stood up and walked to the rows of shelves behind her. She returned a moment later with a manila folder. She opened it and spread a few documents on the counter. "Here is the petition," she said, "and the exhibits." I looked at the documents. There was the eviction order, and underneath it, clipped to the back, was a document titled Residential Lease Agreement. My knees almost gave out. I gripped the counter. "A lease," I whispered. "I don't have a lease. I own the house." The clerk shrugged. "According to this, you are the tenant." I looked at the landlord line. I expected to see my parents' names again, but I didn't. Landlord Crown Alder Holdings, LLC. I stared at the name, Crown Alder Holdings. It sounded fake. It sounded like something generated by a computer. I had never heard of this company. I had never paid rent to them. "Who is this?" I asked, pointing to the name. The clerk flipped a page. "Here is the filing for the LLC representation." She pointed to a line at the bottom of a disclosure form. Representative for Crown Alder Holdings, LLC. Derek Cox, my father. My father was the representative for a company I had never heard of, which claimed to be my landlord. I looked at the address for the LLC. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over, and then I saw the clause. The clerk seemed to notice me reading it and tapped the paper with a long, manicured fingernail. "Standard waiver," she said casually. "You waive the right to contest eviction for non-payment or holdover status. That is why the judge granted the order so quickly." I read the text. In dense, legal jargon, it said that the tenant me agreed to waive all rights to a trial or a hearing in the event of a lease termination. I felt the room spinning. I pulled my phone out and snapped photos of every page. My hands shaking so hard the first few were blurry. I had to brace my elbows against the counter to get a clear shot. "Ma'am, you can't take photos," the clerk said, but she didn't actually move to stop me. "I need copies," I said. 25 cents a page. I threw a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." I walked out of the courthouse with a stack of warm photocopies in my hand. The sun was setting now, casting long orange shadows across the parking lot. The day had started with a knock, and now it was ending with a dossier of lies. I sat in my car and Googled tenant rights hotline. I dialed the first number that popped up. I sat on hold for 20 minutes, listening to terrible jazz music, watching people walk to their cars, going home to their normal lives. Finally, a woman answered. Her voice was kind but hurried. I explained the situation. I told her about the deed, the fake lease, the LLC. "Okay, listen to me," the volunteer said. "If they filed this as a tenant holdover case, the clock is ticking very fast. In our state, holdover cases move quicker than non-payment cases because the lease is considered expired, but I am not a tenant." I almost screamed. "It is a fraudulent lease." "The court doesn't know that yet," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, urgent tone, right now, in the eyes of the system. "You are a renter who refuses to leave. If you don't file a motion to stay the eviction and request a hearing immediately, the sheriff will come back in 14 days and change the locks. You will be removed." "Can I just show them my deed?" I asked. "It's not that simple," she said. "You need to file a formal answer. You need to get an injunction. You need a lawyer. Ma'am, you cannot do this alone. If you go in there shouting about fraud without the paperwork filed correctly, the judge might just treat you like a difficult tenant and sign the final order." I hung up. The silence in the car was deafening. The court system might treat her like a renter in her own home. The sentence looped in my head. I had worked for 10 years to save the down payment for this house. I had painted the walls. I had planted the hydrangeas in the front yard. I had fixed the leaky sink in the guest bathroom with my own 2 hands. And a piece of paper with a fake signature had turned me into a trespasser. I drove home. The house was dark when I arrived. I didn't turn on the lights. I felt like if I turned them on, I would be admitting that I was living in a place that wasn't mine. I went to the kitchen and sat on the floor. The linoleum was cold. I spread the documents out around me in a semicircle. The eviction notice, the fake lease, the notice to quit with the bad signature, my real deed, my real mortgage statements. I looked at them, and for a moment, the grief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an adult grief. It was a child's grief. It was a deep, wailing confusion. Why would they do this? I thought of my father teaching me to ride a bike. I thought of my mother brushing my hair before school. I thought of the Christmas dinners and the birthday cards. How could those people be the same people who filed these papers? How could the hands that held me when I scraped my knee be the same hands that forged my signature on a legal document to make me homeless? I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my arms. I wanted to call them again. I wanted to beg. I wanted to ask what I had done wrong. Had I not called enough? Had I not been successful enough? Was this punishment for moving away? But then, I heard Marlene's voice in my head again. "We warned you." It was the coldness that snapped me out of it. There was no emotion in her voice. There was no anger. It was a transaction. They hadn't done this out of passion. They had done this with calculation. They had formed an LLC. They had gotten a P.O. box. They had forged signatures months ago. This wasn't a fight. This was a heist. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I walked to the dining room table and opened my laptop. I created a new document. I typed the header in bold. Timeline. I needed to understand. I needed to see the pattern. I started typing. January 2023. I close on the house at 404 Elm Street. Dad insists on recommending the home inspector. Inspector finds no major issues. March 2023. Mom asks for a spare key. Just for emergencies. I say no. She cries. I give in and give her a key. July 2023. Dad asks for my social security number. Claims he needs it to list me as a beneficiary on his life insurance. I give it to him. September 2023. I get a weird letter from the county about a property tax adjustment, but Dad tells me it's a scam and says he will handle it for me. I never see the letter again. I typed and typed, pulling every memory of their help from the last year. Every time they offered to fix something, every time they asked for a document, every time they inserted themselves into my life under the guise of parental love. As the list grew, a horrifying picture began to emerge. They hadn't just snapped. They had been planning this since the day I signed the closing papers. I looked at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dark kitchen. I was alone. I was terrified. But as I looked at the timeline, the fear began to harden into something else. It hardened into a cold, sharp resolve. They wanted to treat me like a tenant fine. I would show them what happens when you try to evict the wrong woman. The office of Rosa Hennigan was located in a converted brick walk-up 3 blocks from the courthouse, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a donut shop that smelled perpetually of burnt sugar. The waiting room chairs were mismatched vinyl, and the magazines on the table were 3 years old. It was not the kind of place you went when you were winning. It was the place you went when you were trying to survive. I sat across from Rosa at a metal desk cluttered with manila folders. She was a small woman with sharp features and graying hair pulled back into a severe bun. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't offer me sympathy. She just read the papers I had brought her, flipping the pages with a rhythmic snap-turn-snap. "This is a mess," she said, not looking up. "I know." I said. I felt small in the chair. The last 24 hours had stripped away my confidence, leaving me feeling like a child called to the principal's office. She looked up then, removing her reading glasses. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, scanning my face. "You say you own the house," Rosa stated, "but the court thinks you are a holdover tenant. In the eyes of the law, right now, you are a squatter who has overstayed a lease. The eviction process for holdovers is fast. It is designed to be fast. Landlords do not like losing money, but I am not a tenant," I insisted. Hearing the desperation in my own voice, "It is fraud. My parents forged my signature." Rosa held up a hand. "I believe you, Leah, but belief doesn't stop a sheriff from changing your locks. We need evidence, and we need to understand the strategy." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the files. "Eviction is a blunt instrument," she said. "It is usually about removing a problem, but sometimes it is about leverage. It is about speed. If they get you out in 2 weeks, you are scrambling. You are homeless. You are focused on finding a couch to sleep on, not on auditing the title history of your property." She paused, letting the silence hang in the dusty air. "So I have to ask you one simple question," she continued. "Who benefits if you are forced out quickly?" The question hung there. I thought about my parents. I thought about the weird tension in my mother's voice. "I do not know," I admitted. "My parents are controlling. Maybe they just want to hurt me. Maybe they want the house back so they can sell it." Rosa shook her head slightly. "People do not usually commit felony forgery just to be mean, Leah, and they do not set up shell companies like Crown Alder Holdings just to sell a house they could have pressured you to sell legally. This is complex. Complexity costs money. Someone expects a return on this investment." She tapped the eviction order. "The lockout date is 2 weeks away," she said. "That is the clock. We need to stop the clock. But while I file the motions, you need to find out what they are actually doing with your property. Go to the county recorder online. Look for anything recent. If they are claiming to be the landlord, they must have filed something to transfer the title. You cannot lease out a house you do not own." I left her office with a list of tasks and a knot in my stomach. The sky was overcast, a flat sheet of gray that matched my mood. I drove straight home. I felt a strange reluctance to enter the house. It looked the same, the white siding, the black shutters, the porch swing I had installed last summer, but it felt different. It felt compromised. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was afraid of what I would find. Ignorance had been a kind of shield. Once I looked, the betrayal would be official. I navigated to the county recorder's website. I searched by my address. The list of documents populated the screen. Deed of trust, January 2023, release of mortgage, previous owner, and then, at the top of the list, a new entry, quitclaim deed, grantor Leah Cox, grantee Crown Alder Holdings, LLC. The recording date was 3 months ago. I clicked on the document image. It loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing the nightmare. It was a standard quitclaim deed, a document used to transfer interest in a property quickly, often between family members. It stated that I, Leah Cox, hereby transferred 50% interest in the property to Crown Alder Holdings, LLC, for the sum of $10, 50%. They hadn't taken the whole house. They had taken half, enough to claim ownership, enough to claim rights. I zoomed in on the signature line. There it was again, Leah Cox. It was the same handwriting from the fake lease, stiff, careful. The loops of the letters were too perfect, lacking the rush and flow of a person signing their own name for the 1,000th time. It looked like someone drawing a signature rather than writing it. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. It wasn't just the theft of the property, it was the theft of my name. Someone had sat in a room, perhaps at my parents' kitchen table, and practiced being me. They had held a pen and concentrated on becoming Leah Cox for the 10 seconds it took to steal my life. It felt like a violation. It felt like someone had broken into my bedroom and worn my clothes while I was sleeping. I looked at the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. State of Pine Hollow. Commission expires, May 2026. Notary. Public Brenda Miller. Brenda Miller? I didn't know a Brenda Miller. I printed the document. The paper was warm coming out of the printer. I held it in my hand, staring at the forgery. The shock was fading, replaced by a hot, white anger. It started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. I grabbed my car keys. My father's auto shop, Cox Automotive, was a 30-minute drive away in the industrial district of the city. It was a place I had grown up in, smelling of oil and stale coffee, and the metallic tang of brake dust. I used to do my homework in the waiting room while my dad argued with parts suppliers on the phone. I parked my car in the lot, blocking the entrance to one of the bays. I didn't care. I marched through the front door, the bell chiming cheerfully above my head. The waiting room was empty. A talk radio show droned from a dusty speaker in the corner. Through the glass window, I could see the garage floor. My father was there, wiping his hands on a red rag, talking to one of his mechanics. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slightly stooped. But when he turned and saw me through the glass, his face set into a familiar mask of defensive irritation. He said something to the mechanic and walked into the waiting room. "Leah," he said, his voice rough. "You can't just park in front of the bay like that. Customers need to get in." I slammed the printed deed onto the counter between us. "What is this?" I demanded. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. He looked down at the paper. He didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He just sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a man dealing with an unreasonable child. "It is paperwork. Leah, just paperwork. It is a quitclaim deed." I said, "It says I gave half my house to a company called Crown Alder Holdings. It has my signature on it, but I never signed it." Derek picked up the rag and wiped a spot of grease from the counter, avoiding my eyes. "We had to do it," he said. "It is for liability. You know how litigious people are these days. If someone slips on your sidewalk, they could take everything. We put the house in the LLC to protect it. It is standard asset protection. We were doing you a favor I asked, my voice rising. You forged my signature." "Dad, that is a felony. You transferred my property to a company I don't own, and now that company is evicting me." He slammed his hand on the counter. The noise made me jump, but I didn't step back. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "You are making a scene." "I don't care," I shouted. "You are evicting me." A deputy sheriff came to my door at 6 in the morning. "That is just a formality," he argued, his face turning red. We need to show the bank, the insurance that the property is being managed. You were supposed to sign the lease anyway. If you had just answered your phone and listened to your mother for once, we wouldn't have had to do it this way." I stared at him. The words scrambled in my brain. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly. He blinked, realizing he had slipped. "I said we needed to manage the property." He muttered. "No." I said, "You said you were supposed to sign it anyway." I stepped closer to the counter. "You planned this." I said, "You decided to take the house, and when you realized I wouldn't give it to you, you just took it. You are ungrateful." He spat. "We raised you. We paid for your college. We helped you with the down payment. I paid the down payment," I screamed. "Every cent. You gave me $500 for furniture." That was it. He looked at me with genuine disgust. It was a look that shattered whatever remained of the little girl who used to idolize him. "It is all the same pot." "Leah," he said coldly, "family is family. What is yours is ours. We needed the assets secure. You are too unstable to handle a property of that value alone." "Unstable." I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. "I have a job. I have a credit score of 750. You are the one forging documents in a strip mall, LLC. Go home." "Leah," he said, turning his back on me, "you are hysterical. We will discuss this when you calm down, and move your car." I stood there for a moment, watching his broad back as he walked away into the noise of the garage. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even scared. He felt entitled to my life. He felt that my autonomy was a clerical error he was correcting. I walked out. I moved my car. But I didn't go home. I sat in the parking lot and pulled up the photo of the deed on my phone. I zoomed in on the notary's name, Brenda Miller. I Googled her. She was a mobile notary based in a town 10 miles away. I found a cell phone number. I dialed. It rang 4 times. "Hello? This is Brenda." Her voice was chirpy, professional. "Hello? Brenda," I said. "My name is Leah Cox. I am looking at a quitclaim deed you notarized on November 15th regarding a property at 404 Elm Street." There was a pause. The chirpiness evaporated. "I can't discuss client transactions over the phone." She said, "I am the client." I said, "Supposedly, my name is on the signature line, but I never met you. I never signed that document." Silence. I could hear her breathing. "Ma'am, I follow all state procedures," she said, her voice tight. "I check ID. I witness signatures. If your name is on there, you signed it. I was at work on November 15th. I said, I have time logs. I have witnesses. And the signature doesn't match. I am going to file a report with the Secretary of State's Office for Notary Misconduct and Fraud." "Wait," she said. The word came out fast, panicked. "I waited. I remember that appointment," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It was at a coffee shop. An older man. He said his daughter was incapacitated, sick. He said he had power of attorney. He showed me the papers." "What papers?" I asked. "A power of attorney document," she said. "It looked real. He signed for you as your agent. That is legal if the power of attorney is valid." "I never gave him power of attorney." I said, "Well, I didn't know that." She cried. "He had a seal. He had the paperwork. I just notarized what I was given. Please, I have 3 kids. I can't lose my commission. He lied to you." "Brenda," I said, "and you didn't verify it with me. You're going to have to tell this to a judge." I hung up. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Power of attorney. Another forgery. How many fake documents were out there? How many versions of Leah Cox had they created? I drove home in silence. The anger was still there. But it was joined by a creeping dread. This wasn't just about a house. This was about control. Total, absolute control. The next morning, Rosa filed the emergency motion. We stood in a hallway outside the courtroom, waiting for the judge to review the urgent filings. Rosa looked calm. I felt like I was vibrating. The judge granted a temporary stay. The lockout was paused, but the order came with a condition. "We have a hearing in 10 days. Rosa told me as we walked down the courthouse steps. "The judge has reclassified this from a simple eviction to a title dispute. That is good. It buys us time, but the burden of proof is on us. She stopped and looked at me. Crown Alder, your father is going to claim he has a valid claim to the title. He is going to produce that power of attorney the notary mentioned. We have to prove it is fake. We have to prove you never agreed to be a tenant. We have to prove you are the owner. Not just on the old deed, but in reality, I understand. I said, do you? Rosa asked. They are going to come at you hard. Leah, they will try to make you look incompetent. They will try to make you look like a child who needs a guardian. You need to be bulletproof. I went home and called Tessa. Tessa Marin had been my best friend since sophomore year of college. She was the opposite of me, loud, chaotic, unafraid of confrontation. When I told her everything, she didn't gasp, she swore. A long, inventive string of curse words that made me smile for the first time in 2 days. I am coming over, she said. She arrived with a bottle of wine and a large pizza. We sat on my living room floor, surrounded by the piles of paperwork I had organized. This is insane, Tessa said, chewing on a slice of pepperoni. It is like a Lifetime movie. Your own parents. I know. I said, I keep trying to find a reason. Maybe they are in trouble. Maybe they owe money. Or maybe they are just narcissists who can't stand that you grew up. Tessa suggested. She picked up the timeline I had made. She scanned the entries. Wait, she said, pointing to a date in March. You wrote here that they asked for a key. Yeah, I said. Mom made a huge deal about it, cried about how I didn't trust them, and you gave it to them. I nodded. I felt guilty. Tessa looked around the room. Her eyes narrowed. Leah, if they have a key, and they have been planning this for a year, have you checked the house? What do you mean? I mean, have you checked for things that shouldn't be here or things that are missing if they were building a case against you? Maybe they planted something, or maybe they hid something they didn't want you to see until it was too late. A chill went down my spine. I stood up. I started in the living room. I checked under the cushions. I checked behind the books on the shelves. Tessa took the guest room. We searched for an hour. I felt paranoid, like I was tearing apart my own sanctuary. I moved to the kitchen. I opened the cabinets, pots and pans, Tupperware. I opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I used to store holiday platters and things I rarely used. I stood on a chair to reach the back. My hand brushed against the shelf liner. It felt loose. I pulled the liner up. Underneath, tucked flat against the wood, was a thin manila folder. I pulled it out. It was dusty. Tessa, I called out. She came running from the hallway. What is it? I climbed down from the chair and placed the folder on the counter. I opened it. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. They weren't handwritten notes. They were formal documents. Loan term sheet. Lender Juniper Crest Private Capital. I read the terms. It was a high-interest, short-term loan, a bridge loan. The amount was $150,000. The borrower listed was Crown Alder Holdings, LLC. But down at the bottom, under the section labeled Guarantors, was a name. Personal guarantor, Leah Cox, and another signature. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the date. It was from 6 months ago. They took out a loan. I whispered, they used the house as collateral. But the house wasn't in the LLC's name 6 months ago. Tessa leaned over my shoulder. Look at the collateral description, she said. I looked. Subject to acquisition of title, 404 Elm Street. They borrowed money against my house before they even stole it. I realized they promised this lender they would get the title. That is why they forged the quitclaim deed. They had to deliver the asset to secure the loan. And look at the repayment terms. Tessa said, balloon payment due February 1st. I looked at the calendar on the wall. It was January 20th. The payment is due in 10 days. I said, it clicked. The pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity. They don't just want to control me. I said, they need the money. They spent the loan or they need to refinance it, but they can't refinance it or sell the house if I'm living here fighting them. They need me out, so they can flip it or leverage it to pay off this debt. The eviction wasn't just cruelty, it was a deadline. I sank onto the floor. clutching the folder. $150,000. Where did it go? My father's shop was always struggling, but that was a massive amount of money. They used my identity. I said, if they default on this, the lender comes after me. I am the guarantor. They ruin my credit. They take my house, and I am left with nothing. Tessa sat down next to me and put her arm around my shoulders. We are going to burn them down. Leah, she said fiercely, we are going to take this to Rosa, and we are going to burn them to the ground. I nodded, but I felt cold. The betrayal had deepened. It wasn't just emotional, it was financial predation. My parents had looked at me and seen a resource to be mined. That night, after Tessa left, I couldn't sleep. The house felt hostile. I kept imagining my father letting himself in with that key, hiding the folder while I was at work. Did he look at my pictures? Did he drink my coffee? The violation made my skin crawl. I lay in bed and scrolled through my phone. I found an old voicemail from my mother. It was from a year ago, right around the time I bought the house. I pressed play. Hi, honey. It's Mom. Just calling to see how the unpacking is going. Your dad and I were thinking, maybe we should come down and help you organize the garage. You know how you get overwhelmed with big projects. We just want to help, honey. We just want to make sure you are set up right. Call me back. I listened to it again. You know how you get overwhelmed. We just want to make sure you are set up right. I used to hear love in that voice. I used to hear a mother who worried too much. Now, listening in the dark with the knowledge of the loan and the forgery, I heard something else. I heard the groundwork being laid. I heard her planting the seed of my incompetence. You get overwhelmed. If she said it enough, I would believe it. If she told everyone else I was overwhelmed, they would believe it too. It was a performance. She was building the character of poor unstable Leah long before they forged the first document. It was an alibi constructed in advance. I saved the voicemail. It wasn't a keepsake anymore. It was evidence. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the tree branches outside moving like skeletal fingers across the plaster. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the daughter who needed their help, who would crumble under pressure, who would sign whatever they put in front of her just to make the conflict go away. They were right about who I used to be, but they had no idea who I was becoming. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 3 a.m. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I rehearsed. I rehearsed what I would say to the judge. I rehearsed what I would say to my father. I rehearsed the moment I would prove that I was not a tenant, not a child, and not a victim. I was the owner, and I was going to collect what was owed. The office of Crown Alder Holdings, LLC, did not exist. Not really. Rosa sat behind her desk, the fluorescent light humming above us, and laid out a printout of the Secretary of State's business registry. It is a shell. Leah, she said, tapping the paper with a pen. I ran the registered agent. It is a man named Carl Vance. He lists his address at a strip mall in Marrow County. But when I cross-referenced him, Mr. Vance is the registered agent for 112 different LLCs formed in the last 2 years. I stared at the list. It was a wall of text, a cascade of meaningless corporate names, Blue River Assets, Ironwood Properties, Crown Alder Holdings. They are all the same, Rosa said. Many of them are defendants in quiet title actions or plaintiffs in swift evictions. This is a mill. Your parents didn't come up with this structure on their own. They bought a package. She pulled another document from her file. This one was a tax receipt from the county treasurer. And there is this, she said. I looked at it. It was a receipt for a property tax payment on my house. The amount was small $63.14. It was dated last April. I frowned. I pay my taxes through escrow. My mortgage company handles it. Usually. Yes, Rosa said, but sometimes small supplemental bills fall through the cracks. A school levy adjustment, a sewage assessment. This was a tiny balance that was left unpaid. I didn't even know about it. I said, I never got a notice. Because someone paid it before you could get a notice. Rosa said, look at the payer. Crown Alder Holdings, LLC. They paid $63. I whispered. Rosa nodded grimly. It is strategic. If you go to a judge and say, I am the owner, and they say, I am the landlord, the judge looks at who acts like an owner. Owners pay taxes. By paying this tiny bill that you missed, they created a paper trail. They can stand in court and say, we have been maintaining the financial obligations of the property while Ms. Cox has been negligent. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was so small. It was barely the cost of a tank of gas. But it was a seed. They had planted it months ago, knowing it would grow into evidence. It is a narrative built on tiny truths, Rosa said. They use the truth to lie. You did miss a payment. They did pay it, but the context is entirely fabricated. I left Rosa's office feeling like the ground was dissolving under my feet. I had thought this was a messy family squabble. I realized now it was an architectural blueprint for my destruction. I needed to see the source. I needed to see where my parents had bought the weapon they were using against me. I drove to the address listed for the registered agent. It was in a depressed commercial zone near the highway, a row of flat-roofed buildings with faded stucco. The address belonged to a storefront sandwiched between a check-cashing place and a vape shop. The sign above the door read, Vance Business Services. I parked and watched for a moment. A man in a stained windbreaker walked out of the check-cashing place. A car with a taped-up window idled in front of the vape shop. I put on my sunglasses and walked in. The air inside smelled of stale toner and carpet cleaner. There was no mahogany desk, no high-end art, just a counter, a row of filing cabinets, and a receptionist who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am looking for information on forming an LLC. My father used you guys. He said you were great for asset protection." She looked up then. She assessed me, my blazer, my purse, my shoes. She seemed to decide I was a paying customer. "We have different packages," she said, reaching for a laminated sheet on the counter. "The basic is just the filing. The gold includes the registered agent service and the operating agreement. The platinum includes the anonymity shield and the pre-filed quitclaims." My stomach turned over. "Pre-filed quitclaims. What is that?" I asked. Pointing to the platinum tier, she shrugged. "It is for people who need to move assets fast. We prepare the deeds so they are ready to record whenever you need them. Keeps things clean." It wasn't clean. It was a weaponization of bureaucracy. My parents had walked in here, paid a few $100s, and bought a kit designed to strip me of my home. I looked at the wall behind her. There was a poster. It showed a happy family standing in front of a large house, protected by a literal umbrella made of gold coins. The text read, "Protect your legacy. Don't let them take what is yours." It was perverse. My parents believed that poster. They believed I was the them. They believed taking my house was protecting their legacy. "We just file what people bring us." The receptionist said, noticing me staring, "You fill out the forms. We stamp them." "We don't give legal advice." I walked out before I screamed. I sat in my car, breathing hard. It was so banal. My life was being dismantled by a woman chewing gum and a laminated price list. When I got home, the sun was setting. The shadows stretched long across my lawn. I saw my neighbor, Mr. Halden, standing by his mailbox. He was a retiree, the kind of man who measured his grass with a ruler and knew exactly when trash day was. He waved, but it was a hesitant wave. He looked like he wanted to retreat into his house. "Mr. Halden," I called out, forcing a smile. He stopped. I walked over to the property line. "Hi, Leah," he said. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "Look, I don't want to get involved in family business," he said, "but I saw the police car the other morning. It is a misunderstanding." I said quickly, "A paperwork error." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "I figured," he said, "but, well, I saw your folks here a few weeks ago." My heart skipped a beat. "My parents?" I asked. "When, maybe 3 weeks ago," he said. They were parked right here, near the mailbox. They weren't coming to your house, though. They were talking to Bill Sallows. Bill Sallows was the president of the Redmont Ridge Community Council, our homeowners association. I stared at Mr. Halden. Why would my parents be talking to the HOA president? They didn't live here. Are you sure? I asked. Positive. Mr. Halden said, I heard them talking. Your dad was doing a lot of pointing at your roof, and Bill was taking notes. Look, Leah, I like you. You are a quiet neighbor, but Bill has been on a tear lately about neighborhood standards. I just thought you should know. Thank you. Mr. Halden, I said. I felt a cold prickle of sweat on my back. I went inside and immediately looked up the community council meeting schedule. There was a meeting tonight. 7 o'clock at the rec center. I changed into jeans and a sweater. I needed to blend in. I needed to be invisible. The rec center was a sterile room with folding chairs and too bright lighting. There were about 20 people there. Most were retirees like Mr. Halden. Bill Sallows sat at a table at the front, looking self-important in a polo shirt with the community logo. I sat in the back row. They went through the usual agenda: budget for snow removal, complaints about someone leaving trash bins out too long. Then, Bill cleared his throat. New business, he said. We have been discussing the issue of risk properties in the neighborhood. We want to make sure we are stabilizing home values. We have a guest tonight who is consulting with us on property management standards, Mr. Gavin Pell. A man stood up from the front row. He was in his 40s, wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny. He had the kind of face that was handsome in a generic way, like a news anchor or a politician. He smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you. Bill, Gavin said. His voice was smooth, practiced. I represent Crown Alder Holdings. We are investing in this community because we believe in Redmont Ridge, but we also believe that responsible ownership is the key to value. We are working to rehabilitate distressed assets and ensure that every home meets the high standards of this association. He didn't say my name, he didn't say my address, but every word felt like a target painted on my chest. Distressed asset, rehabilitate. He was talking about my home. I scanned the room. People were nodding. They liked words like value and standards. They didn't know that distressed asset meant a woman being defrauded by her parents. Gavin continued, We are committed to working with the council to ensure that transition periods are smooth and that any tenancy issues are resolved without impacting the neighborhood's character. He sat down. There was polite applause. I felt sick. My parents had involved the HOA to turn the neighbors against me. They were painting me as a blight, a problem that needed to be excised for the good of the property values. When the meeting adjourned, I waited. I watched people file out. Gavin Pell stayed behind, shaking hands with Bill Sallows. I walked up to them. Bill looked surprised to see me. Oh, Leah, I didn't know you were here. I ignored him. I looked straight at Gavin Pell. I am Leah Cox, I said. Gavin turned. His smile didn't waver. It was like it was glued to his face. Ms. Cox, he said. A pleasure to meet you. I don't think it is. I said, You are listed as the property manager on the eviction suit against me. Bill Sallows took a step back, looking uncomfortable. I will just go lock up the back, he mumbled, scurrying away. Gavin didn't move. He looked at me with a condescending pity. Leah, he said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume. Can I call you Leah? Look, nobody wants this to be ugly. Your father is very concerned about you. My father is forging documents, I said, and you are helping him. Gavin chuckled softly. That is a very serious accusation, and one that won't hold up in court. The paperwork is solid. Leah, we have the deed. We have the lease. We have the payment history. He took a step closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and mints. You are fighting a battle you have already lost, he said. The lockout is coming. You can drag this out. Spend money you don't have on lawyers, and end up with an eviction on your record that will make it impossible for you to rent a decent apartment for 7 years, or I asked. My fists clenched at my sides. Or you can take the off-ramp while it is offered, he said. Voluntary vacate. We drop the suit. We seal the record. We might even be able to offer a little cash for keys. Help you get settled somewhere. More appropriate. Appropriate, I repeated. Somewhere you can handle, he said. The rage was a physical thing, hot and blinding, but before I could speak, he checked his watch. I have to run, he said. I know you have that early shift at the logistics center tomorrow. 6:30 start, right? You should probably get some rest. He smiled, turned, and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen. 6:30 start. I never worked the 6:30 shift. I was 9 to 5. But tomorrow, specifically, I had agreed to cover an early shift for a coworker who was out sick. I had only arranged it via text message with my boss 3 hours ago. He knew my schedule. He knew a change in my schedule that hadn't even happened yet. They were watching me, or they were reading my messages. I drove home looking in the rearview mirror every 5 seconds. Every pair of headlights looked like Gavin Pell. Every shadow looked like my father. When I got inside, I locked the door. Then I checked the windows. Then I pushed a heavy chair in front of the back door. My phone rang. It was Rosa. Leah. I got the lease copy from the plaintiff's attorney. She said without preamble, I already saw it. I said, pacing the living room, it is fake, yes, but I'm looking at the payment ledger attached to it. She said, it lists 12 months of rent payments, cash payments. So they made up numbers. I said, no. Rosa said, that is the problem. They didn't just make up numbers. They listed specific dates. January 12th, February 14th, March 3rd. I stopped pacing, and I had you send me your bank statements. Remember, Rosa said, Leah, on every single one of those dates, you made a cash withdrawal from your checking account. I blinked. I tried to remember. January 12th. I took out $200 for my nephew's birthday gift. February 14th. I took out cash for a dinner with friends where we split the bill. They matched the withdrawals, Rosa said. They looked at your bank history, found every time you took out cash, and recorded it as a rent payment on the ledger. It makes it look perfect. If we go to court, they will show the judge. Look, she withdrew $500 on this date. And here's the receipt for $500 rent on the same date. I felt the room spinning. How did they have my bank statements? I whispered. I don't know, Rosa said. But did you ever leave statements lying around? Did you ever log in on a computer they had access to? I thought about the help. I thought about the time my father fixed my Wi-Fi. I thought about the time my mother helped me organize my office. They went through my trash. I said, or they put spyware on my laptop. Or they just dug through my filing cabinet when they had that key. Leah, Rosa said, her voice serious. This is not just a legal strategy. This is stalking. They have reverse-engineered your entire life to fit their story. I hung up. I stood in the center of my kitchen. I felt exposed. I felt like the walls were made of glass. They knew my schedule. They knew my spending habits. They knew my tax status. I grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer. I went to the front door and unscrewed the lock. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to work. I had bought a new deadbolt at the hardware store on the way home. A heavy-duty one. I replaced the front lock. I replaced the back lock. Then I took a cheap wireless camera I had bought and mounted it in the corner of the living room window. Pointing out at the driveway, I synced it to my phone. I sat on the couch with the lights off, watching the feed on my screen. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. But inside my head, it was screaming. Maybe I am misunderstanding. A voice whispered. It was a weak, treacherous voice. Maybe Mom didn't mean to do this. Maybe Dad really thinks he is helping. Maybe I am the crazy one. It was the gaslighting taking root. They had built such a complete, detailed reality that I was starting to doubt my own. The ledger matched. The tax bill was paid. The neighbors thought I was a risk. If everyone says you are a tenant, are you still an owner? If everyone says you are crazy, are you still sane? I needed an anchor. I needed someone who knew them. Someone who knew the specific frequency of their madness. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Jillian Cox, my cousin, my father's brother's daughter. She was 10 years older than me. She lived in a different state. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, mostly because my parents always spoke about her with a curled lip. Jillian is difficult. Jillian caused so much trouble for the family. I pressed call. It rang and rang. I was about to hang up when she answered. "Hello, Jillian. It is Leah." There was a long silence. "Leah," she said. Her voice was guarded. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said. I let the word hang there. "No, it is not. My parents are evicting me." "What?" "They forged a deed." I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "They transferred my house to an LLC. They are claiming I am a tenant. They have a fake lease. They have my bank records." I stopped, breathing hard. I waited for her to tell me I was lying. I waited for her to tell me that Uncle Derek would never do that. But she didn't. She exhaled, a long, slow sound. "I wondered when they would do it to you," she said quietly. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. Jillian's voice was low, devoid of surprise. "They did something like this before. Leah, years ago. To who? To a friend of theirs," she said. "And to my dad." "My uncle," I asked. "But Dad and Uncle Mike were best friends. That is what they told you." Jillian said, "The truth is, your dad ruined mine. It was a business deal, a partnership. Documents were signed that my dad swore he never saw. He lost his share of the family land. It destroyed him. Leah. That is why we moved away." I sat there, gripping the phone. The room seemed to tilt. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. "Because of the settlement," she said. "They settled out of court. There was a confidentiality clause. My dad signed it to keep the peace, to keep the family from exploding. He protected Derek. He protected the name." She paused. "I have the boxes. Leah, Dad kept everything. The early drafts, the forged notes, the proof that Derek has done this before." She took a breath. "I can send them to you. But if I do, it blows everything up. It is not just about your house anymore. It is about the whole family. If you use this, you are declaring war." I looked at the monitor on my phone. The empty driveway, the dark street. I thought about the poster in the strip mall. "Protect your legacy." My legacy was a lie. My family was a crime syndicate masked as a Sunday dinner. I closed my eyes. I felt the grief wash over me, heavy and final. The parents I thought I had were dead. They had died the moment I found that quitclaim deed. Now, I was just fighting the people wearing their faces. "Send it," I said. "Are you sure?" Jillian asked. "Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I am done protecting them." I said, "Send everything." I hung up. I sat in the dark, watching the camera feed. I waited for the email notification. I waited for the past to arrive and explain the present. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff. And I was ready to burn the legacy to the ground. The email from Jillian arrived at 4 a.m. I was sitting on my living room floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the timeline on my laptop screen until the pixels burned into my retinas. When the notification pinged, the sound was loud in the silent house, like a glass breaking. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF, 50 pages long, scans of old, yellowed paper. I started reading. The legalese was dense, but the story it told was simple and brutal. 15 years ago, my father, Derek Cox, had started a venture called DC Logistics. He had brought in a partner, a man named Robert Halloway, Jillian's father. My uncle. They had borrowed money from a private individual, a family friend named Silas Vance. The documents showed a promissory note. Then, they showed a transfer of assets. DC Logistics had transferred its trucks and equipment to a new entity, Red Hawk Transport, just weeks before the loan came due. When Silas Vance sued for repayment, DC Logistics was an empty shell. It had no money. It had no assets. It was a ghost. But the most damning document was the settlement agreement. It was signed by Derek Cox and Robert Halloway. It agreed to pay Silas Vance a fraction of what was owed over 10 years. but it included a strict confidentiality clause. If anyone spoke about the fraud, the full amount would become due immediately. I stared at the signatures. My father's signature was bold, confident. My uncle's signature looked shaky. Jillian had included a note in the body of the email. My dad didn't know about Red Hawk Transport until the lawsuit was filed. Derek moved the assets without telling him. Using a power of attorney my dad signed when he was in the hospital for his heart surgery. Dad signed the settlement because Derek told him if he didn't, they would both go to jail. He spent the rest of his life paying for a debt he didn't create. That is why we never came to Christmas. That is why Dad died with nothing. I lowered the laptop screen. I felt a physical cracking inside my chest, a sensation like ribs separating. For 33 years, I had believed a specific story about my family. I believed we were unlucky. I believed the world was hard on Derek Cox. I believed his businesses failed because of the economy, or bad partners, or regulations. I believed my mother when she said people were jealous of us. I had been trained to believe them. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. But now I saw them through a new lens. I remembered being 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother cried because I had told a teacher that Daddy was sleeping in the guest room. She had told me, "Family business stays in the family. Leah, when you talk to outsiders, you hurt us. Do you want to hurt us?" I remembered being 16, questioning why I couldn't go on the school trip when they had just bought a new boat. My father had given me the silent treatment for 3 days until I apologized for being selfish. My loyalty wasn't natural. It was engineered. It was a reflex carved into me by years of operant conditioning. Every time I asked a question, I was punished with guilt. Every time I complied, I was rewarded with affection. They hadn't just stolen my house. They had stolen my ability to trust my own perception of reality. I stood up. The grief was still there, but it was changing. It was cooling, hardening into something sharp and dangerous. I printed the documents. I put them in a folder. I wasn't the 7-year-old girl at the kitchen table anymore. I was the owner of the house at 404 Elm Street. And I was done apologizing. I met Rosa at her office at 9 o'clock sharp. I slapped the folder of Jillian's documents onto her desk. "It is a pattern." I said, "They did it to my uncle. They stripped the assets, hid them in a shell company, and forced a settlement." Rosa flipped through the pages. Her face was grim. "This establishes habit," she said. "It establishes intent. This destroys the misunderstanding defense. But I have found something else." She turned her computer monitor so I could see it. It was a complex web of corporate filings. I started digging into Juniper Crest Private Capital. She said, "The lender who holds the loan on your house, on the surface, they look like a standard hard money lender. High interest, short terms, aggressive collection. But look at their history." She pointed to a list of names. In 2020, Juniper Crest filed a series of foreclosures on properties in the southern part of the state. In every single case, the property manager listed for the distressed assets was a consulting firm called Apex Management Solutions. "And who is the principal of Apex Management Solutions?" I asked, though I already felt the answer in my gut. Rosa clicked a link. A photo popped up. It was a younger version, perhaps 5 years ago. But the smile was the same. The shiny suit was the same. "Gavin Pell," Rosa said. "He works for the lender." I said, "He is not just a property manager hired by your father." Rosa said, "He is a pipeline. He finds people who are desperate like your father. He offers them a way out. We can restructure your assets. We can hide the property in an LLC. We can get you a loan. He brings them to Juniper Crest. Juniper Crest lends the money. Gavin manages the transition. And when the borrower inevitably defaults because the terms are predatory, Juniper Crest takes the house, and Gavin gets a cut of the resale." I felt sick. My father isn't just the perpetrator. I said, "He is the mark. He is both." Rosa corrected. "He is the mark because he is desperate. He is the perpetrator because he threw you under the bus to save himself. He sold you to Gavin Pell to pay off his own debts. I needed to see them. I needed to see the people holding the paper on my life. I drove to the address listed for Juniper Crest Private Capital. It wasn't in a bank building, it was in a sleek, glass-walled office park near the airport, the kind of place that housed hedge funds and patent trolls. I walked into the lobby. It was cold, minimalist, smelling of white tea and money. The receptionist was a young man in a tight shirt who didn't look up when I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting that I could not. In fact, help anything. "My name is Leah Cox," I said. "I am here to discuss the loan on the property at 404 Elm Street." He typed something into his computer. His eyebrows went up. "Crown Alder Holdings," he said. "You are not the borrower of record. I am the guarantor." I said, "And I am the owner of the property, and I am here to tell you that the loan was secured through fraud." He stopped typing. He looked at me with a bored expression that made me want to scream. "Ma'am, if you have a dispute with the borrower, you need to take that up with them. We hold a valid note, and frankly, the account is in arrears." "Arrears?" I asked. He pulled a file from a drawer behind him. He didn't hand it to me. He just placed it on the counter. "We sent a notice of default 5 days ago." He said, "If the balloon payment isn't made by the 1st of the month, we will move to foreclosure. The eviction is just the first step to secure the asset." I looked at the notice. I read the address. Leah Cox, care of Derek Cox, 1218 Maple Drive. That was my parents' address. "You sent the notice to my parents." I said, "You didn't send it to the property. That is the mailing address on file." He said, shrugging, "Look, Ms. Cox, I don't know what kind of family drama you are running here, but Juniper Crest expects payment. We are not a charity." He slid the paper across the counter toward me. "Since you are here, consider yourself served," he said. "You have 7 days to cure the default, or we take the house." I took the paper. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so hot it felt like it was cauterizing my nerves. I walked out of the office. The sun was blindingly bright off the glass buildings. 7 days. They had timed it perfectly. The eviction would get me out. The foreclosure would wipe out my title, and Juniper Crest would own the house before I could even get a court date. I got in my car. I didn't go home. I drove to the city. I drove to the house on Maple Drive. It was a nice house, a colonial with a manicured lawn. My parents had lived there for 20 years. It was the house where I learned to walk. It was the house where I had my prom pictures taken. I pulled into the driveway. My father's truck was not there, but my mother's sedan was. I walked up the path. I didn't knock. I used the key on my ring, the key I had carried since I was 16. I opened the door. "Mom," I called out. The house smelled the same. Vanilla candles and lemon polish. It was a smell that used to mean safety. Now it smelled like a lie. Marlene appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a bathrobe, her hair unbrushed. She looked frail. When she saw me, her hand flew to her throat. "Leah," she gasped, "you can't just walk in here." I walked up the stairs. She backed away from me. "You sent the default notice here," I said, holding up the paper from Juniper Crest. "You stole my mail. You stole my identity. And now they are going to foreclose in 7 days." Marlene's face crumpled. She retreated into the master bedroom, and I followed her. We had to. She whimpered. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. "You don't understand. Leah, it was a mess. The business. Derek owed people. Bad people. So you stole my house," I asked. "You stole the only thing I have. We were going to pay it back," she cried. Her voice was high and thin, like a child's. "Gavin said it was just a bridge loan. He said we could flip the house, pay off the debts, and have enough left over to buy you a condo, a nice condo, something smaller, easier for you to manage." I stared at her. Even now, in the middle of the confession, she was still doing it. Easier for you to manage. "I don't want a condo." "Mom," I screamed. "I want my house. I want my life. How could you do this to me? I am your daughter. They were going to take everything." "Leah," she sobbed. "The shop. This house. Derek was cornered. A man like Gavin. He doesn't take no for an answer. He told us if we didn't come up with collateral, he would ruin us. You were the only one with equity. You were the only one who could save us. Save you, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You sacrificed me. You threw me to the wolves to save your own skins. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but there was no remorse in her eyes. There was only panic. We are family, she whispered. Family helps each other. That was the moment the cord finally cut. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, and I realized she didn't see me as a person. She saw me as an extension of herself, a limb she could amputate if the body was in danger. I heard the front door open downstairs. Heavy footsteps. Derek, Marlene called out, panic spiking in her voice. Derek, she is here. My father thundered up the stairs. He was still wearing his work shirt, stained with grease. When he saw me standing in the bedroom, his face turned a dark, violent red. What the hell are you doing in my house? He roared. I turned to face him. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was just disgusted. I know about Gavin Pell. I said, I know about Juniper Crest. I know about the loan you took out in my name. I know about the fraud you committed 15 years ago with Uncle Robert. I know everything. Dad, he stopped. The mention of Robert seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He blinked, and for a second, I saw fear. But then the anger rushed back in to cover it. You have been digging, he sneered. You think you are so smart. You think you can outmaneuver me. I am not trying to outmaneuver you. I said, I am trying to stop you from robbing me. Robbing you? He laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. You ungrateful little brat. Who paid for your braces? Who paid for your college tuition? Who put food in your mouth for 18 years? I paid for my own college. I said, I took out loans. I am still paying them. We raised you, he shouted, stepping closer, invading my space. We gave you everything you owed us. You think that house is yours. You think anything you have is yours. It is ours. Leah, we made you. I stared at him. The logic was so twisted, so absolute. In his mind, parenthood was a bill. I was an investment that had finally matured, and he was just collecting the dividend. The house was the only clean asset left, he yelled, spit flying from his lips. Everything else was leveraged. Everything else was mortgaged. You were sitting there on $200,000 of equity, playing house, while we were drowning. You should have offered it to us. I would have helped you, I screamed back, if you had asked. If you had told me you were in trouble, I would have tried to help. But you didn't ask. You stole it. You wouldn't have understood. He scoffed. You are too soft. You would have whined about the risk. I did what a man has to do. I protected this family. Protected, I asked. You destroyed this family. Get out, he said. His voice was low now. Dangerous. Get out of my house before I throw you out. I looked at Marlene. She was still sitting on the bed, weeping silently. She didn't look at me. She wouldn't intervene. She never had. I walked past him. I walked down the stairs. I walked out the front door. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just breathing. My hands were numb. My face felt cold. I had expected a confession. I had expected guilt. Instead, I had found a bottomless well of entitlement. I called Rosa. They admitted it. I said, my voice sounded distant, like I was speaking from underwater. Marlene admitted they were cornered by debt. Derek admitted he viewed my house as an asset he was entitled to. They took the loan. Did you record it? Rosa asked. No, I said. I was too. I just didn't think of it. That is okay, Rosa said. We don't need the recording. We have the documents. But Leah, listen to me. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. This is grand larceny. This is identity theft. This is a criminal enterprise involving a predatory lender. I know. I said, you need to file a police report. Rosa said, not just an information report, a criminal complaint. You need to go to the sheriff and hand over everything. The forged deed, the fake lease, the evidence of the loan. I hesitated. If I do that, I asked, They will be arrested. Likely? Yes, Rosa said, or at least investigated. It will stop the eviction immediately. No judge will grant a lockout while there is an active criminal investigation into the title's validity. But Leah, once you ring that bell, you cannot unring it. You will be the daughter who put her parents in prison. I looked at the house on Maple Drive. I saw the silhouette of my father in the window, watching me. They didn't give me a choice. Rosa. I said, they put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger. The only reason I am not dead is because the gun jammed. Go home, Rosa said gently. Sleep on it. If you still feel this way in the morning, go to the sheriff. I drove home. The sun had set, and the house was dark. I parked in the driveway and walked to the porch. I stopped. The mat was crooked. I looked at the camera I had installed in the window. The tiny red light was blinking. I unlocked the door and went inside. I locked it behind me. I pulled up the app on my phone. I scrolled back through the footage. 2:14 in the morning. A figure walked up the driveway. It was too dark to make out a face, but the build was wrong for my father. This person was leaner. They moved with a casual confidence. They stepped onto the porch. They stopped just out of the frame of the lens. They stood there for a full minute, doing nothing, just standing at my door in the middle of the night. Then, a hand reached into the frame and slid something under the mat. I watched the figure walk away. They didn't run. They strolled. I went back outside. I lifted the mat. There was a white envelope, no stamp, no address. I brought it into the kitchen. I opened it with a knife. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a photograph. It was a picture of my house, taken from the street. But it wasn't recent. It was from the day I bought it. The sold sign was still in the yard. Across the bottom of the photo, someone had written 2 words in black marker. Be smart. It wasn't my father's handwriting. It was smooth, elegant script. It was Gavin Pell. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just my parents anymore. This was the network. This was the man who doesn't take no for an answer. They knew I was fighting. They knew I had seen the documents. This was the warning shot. Be smart. Take the settlement. Walk away. I looked at the photo. I looked at the house I had loved. Fear is a strange thing. For weeks. It had paralyzed me. It had made me feel small and helpless. But staring at that note, the fear curdled. It soured into something bitter and hard. They thought I was weak. They thought a threat would send me running back to the safety of submission. But they had miscalculated. They had stripped me of my illusions. They had stripped me of my family. They had stripped me of my safety. I had nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, watching the sun come up. I watched the light hit the hydrangeas I had planted. I watched the world wake up. At 8 o'clock, I showered. I put on my best suit. I brushed my hair until it shone. I gathered the files, the timeline, the forged deed, the fake lease, the notary's admission logs, the email from Jillian, the photo from under the mat. I put them all in a thick, black binder. I drove to the Pine Hollow County Sheriff's Office. It was the same building where the deputy had come from, the one who served the eviction. I walked up to the front desk. The sergeant on duty looked up. Can I help you? I placed the binder on the counter. The sound was heavy, solid. My name is Leah Cox. I said, I want to file a report for identity theft, forgery, and mortgage fraud. The sergeant looked at the size of the binder. That looks like a lot of paperwork. Ma'am, he said, do you want to just fill out a statement form? No. I said, I want to speak to a detective. This involves a coordinated scheme to defraud a homeowner. I have evidence of felony misconduct by a notary public, a private lender, and my parents. The sergeant looked at me. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, but he also saw the set of my jaw. He saw that I wasn't going away. Have a seat, he said. I will get Detective Miller. I sat on the hard plastic bench. I watched the people coming and going, a woman paying a speeding ticket, a man reporting a stolen bike. I looked at my hands. They were resting on my knees. They were perfectly still. I waited for the door to open. I waited to burn the legacy down. I was ready. The fallout from filing a police report against your own parents does not happen in a straight line. It happens in a blast radius. I had expected silence. I had expected them to retreat, to lawyer up, to hide behind the walls of their home on Maple Drive and wait for the subpoenas. I was naive. I had forgotten that my father was a man who believed the best defense was a scorched earth offense, and my mother was a woman who could weaponize a whisper network faster than the internet could transmit data. It started 48 hours after I walked out of the sheriff's station. My phone began to buzz with texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to since Christmas 2 years ago. Thinking of you. Leah. So sorry to hear you are struggling. We are praying for your mental health. Honey, please let Derek help you. Don't push your family away. We all have breaking points. I read them with a growing sense of horror. I called Jillian immediately. She answered on the first ring. Her voice tight. You saw the texts, she asked. What are they talking about? I demanded, pacing the length of my kitchen. Why is Aunt Linda praying for my mental health? Because Derek called everyone, Jillian said. He got ahead of the story. Leah. He told the whole family that you are having a severe nervous breakdown. He said you have become paranoid, that you are imagining conspiracies, and that you stopped taking your medication. I stopped pacing. I don't take medication. I said, I never have. They don't know that, Jillian said. He is painting a picture. Leah. He is telling them that the police report is just a symptom of your psychosis. He is saying they tried to intervene, tried to manage your assets to keep you safe, and you snapped. I sank onto a kitchen chair. It was brilliant. It was evil. But it was brilliant. If I was crazy, then the forged documents weren't crimes. They were misunderstandings viewed through the lens of a delusion. If I was unstable, then my testimony in court was worthless. They are trying to discredit me before I even take the stand. I whispered. It is the smear campaign, Jillian said. It is standard operating procedure for them. When my dad tried to fight them about the land deal, Derek told people Dad was drinking again. He discredited the victim so the paperwork would win. You have to hold the line. Leah, do not engage with the relatives. Do not try to defend yourself to them. You save it for the judge. I hung up, feeling dirty. I felt like I was covered in a film of slime that I couldn't wash off. My own history, my own personality, was being rewritten in real time by the people who had known me longest. They were taking my silence, my years of being the good, quiet daughter, and twisting it into evidence of a latent pathology. I went to see Rosa that afternoon. I needed the sterility of the law. I needed facts that didn't care about my Aunt Linda's prayers. Rosa looked tired. Her desk was covered in stacks of paper. But she smiled grimly when I walked in. We got the notary logs, she said. She pushed a photocopy across the desk. It was a page from a bound journal, the kind notaries use to record their acts. Brenda Miller's log. Rosa said, Look at the entry for November 15th. I looked. It was scribbled. The ink slightly smeared. Quitclaim deed. Grantor Leah Cox. Grantee Crown Alder Holdings. But the signature column, the place where I was supposed to sign the book to prove I was there, was empty. It is blank. I said, Exactly. Rosa said, I deposed her this morning. I put her under oath and asked her why the signature line was empty. She tried to bluster at first, talked about clerical errors, but I reminded her that falsifying a notary log is a felony that carries jail time. She cracked. What did she say? She admitted that you were never there, Rosa said. She admitted that Derek came to her car in the coffee shop parking lot. He told her you were working a double shift and couldn't get away. He told her. My daughter is too busy to come in, but she signed this at the kitchen table this morning. You know me, Brenda. You know I am good for it. I felt a cold flash of anger. She is too busy. It was such a mundane lie. She notarized a signature she didn't witness because she didn't want to inconvenience a man she knew. Rosa said, It was a procedural shortcut, a favor. But in the eyes of the law, it is complicity in fraud. We have her on record now. That quitclaim deed is dead in the water. That is good. Right, I asked. That proves I am the owner. It proves the transfer was invalid, Rosa said, but it doesn't solve the eviction immediately. They still have the lease. They still have the payment ledger. And Leah, we found something else regarding that ledger. She pulled another file. This one was a bank statement. The lease says you paid rent in cash. Rosa said, we knew that was a lie because it matched your withdrawals, but we couldn't figure out where the money actually went, if they just claimed you paid cash. It is your word against theirs. But to make it look real to an auditor, the money usually has to land somewhere. She pointed to a line on the statement. This is a statement for an account at First Marrow Credit Union, she said. The account holder is Leah Cox. I frowned. I don't bank at First Marrow. I have been with Chase since I was 22. You opened this account when you were 19, Rosa said. A student builder account. I racked my brain. I vaguely remembered it. A small account my parents helped me open before I went to college to help me learn to balance a checkbook. I haven't used that in over a decade. I said, I thought it was closed. It wasn't. Rosa said, it had a balance of $5 for 10 years. But starting last January, there is activity, cash deposits. She slid a finger down the column. $500, $600, amounts that matched the rent listed on the fake lease. I stared at the numbers. They were paying themselves rent. I said slowly, into an account with my name on it. Your parents had access. Rosa said, your name is on it, but so is your mother's, as a custodian from when you were a minor. They never removed her. They have been depositing money into this account, then transferring it out to Crown Alder Holdings. I felt sick. It was devious. If a judge looked at this, they would see money moving from an account named Leah Cox to the landlord. It looked like proof of tenancy. They used my own financial footprint against me. I whispered, they kept a zombie account alive for 10 years, just in case they needed to frame me. It proves premeditation, Rosa said, but it also makes it harder to untangle. We have to prove you didn't make those deposits. We have to subpoena the bank for security footage of the ATM or teller window. It takes time, and we have the hearing tomorrow. My phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. Ms. Cox, this is Arthur Vance, attorney for Crown Alder Holdings and Mr. Gavin Pell. Please see the attached settlement offer. We believe this provides a dignified resolution for all parties. I looked at Rosa. She nodded. Open it. I opened the PDF on my phone. It was short. 3 pages. The terms were simple. 1. Leah Cox agrees to voluntarily vacate the premises at 404 Elm Street within 7 days. 2. Crown Alder Holdings agrees to waive all claims for back rent and legal fees. 3. Crown Alder Holdings will provide a relocation assistance payment of $5,000. 4. Both parties agree to a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding all matters of title, ownership, and family dispute. The record of the eviction filing will be sealed. $5,000, I said, my voice shaking. They want to buy my house for $5,000. No, Rosa said, reading over my shoulder. They want to buy your silence. She pointed to the 4th clause. The NDA is the point. Leah, Gavin Pell knows you went to the police. He knows the notary cracked. He knows the house of cards is wobbling. He doesn't care about the house anymore. He cares about the investigation. If you sign this, you drop the police report. You agree that it was a family dispute. You disappear. And if I don't? Rosa looked at me. If you don't, they go to the mat tomorrow. They destroy your character. They use the mental breakdown narrative. They drag this out for months while you live in a construction zone of litigation. I looked at the number, $5,000. It was an insult, but it was also an exit. I closed my eyes. For a split second, I imagined taking it. I imagined packing my car. I imagined driving away from Redmont Ridge, away from the poison of my family, away from the fear of Gavin Pell. I could start over. I could be free. But then I imagined my mother sitting in her kitchen, relieved. I imagined my father laughing about how he handled me. I imagined Gavin Pell finding another desperate family, another daughter to erase. If I take this, I said, opening my eyes, I am saying that I am a tenant. I am saying that the lie is true. Yes, Rosa said. You are selling your truth for $5,000. I deleted the email. Tell them no, I said. Tell them I will see them in court. I left Rosa's office with my head high. But the universe has a way of testing your resolve just when you think you are strongest. I went to work. I needed the distraction. I needed to pretend that I was still a normal person with a normal job. But when I swiped my badge at the entrance, the light turned red. I tried again. Red. The security guard, a man named Mike, who usually asked me about my weekend, looked down at his clipboard. Ms. Cox, you need to go to the front desk. HR is waiting for you. My stomach dropped. I walked to the glass-walled reception area. The HR director, a woman named Karen who always wore scarves that looked too expensive for the office, was standing there. She didn't smile. Leah, she said, come with me. She led me to a conference room. The blinds were drawn. My boss, Sarah, was there too. She looked pale and refused to meet my eyes. Sit down, Leah, Karen said. I sat. The chair felt cold. We received an anonymous complaint this morning via our ethics hotline. Karen said. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a transcript of a call. Caller claims employee Leah Cox is involved in significant financial fraud. Caller alleges employee is using company resources to manage illegal real estate transactions and is currently the subject of a police investigation regarding identity theft. I stared at the paper. Subject of a police investigation. It was a twist of the knife. I was the victim, but they had phrased it so I sounded like the suspect. Is this true? Karen asked. Are you under investigation? I looked at Sarah. She was studying her hands. I am not the suspect, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. I am the victim. My identity was stolen. I filed the police report. Karen looked skeptical. The complaint says you are being evicted for fraud. I am being evicted because the people who stole my identity are trying to cover their tracks. I said, I know how this sounds. It sounds messy, but I have the police report number right here. I pulled the card from my purse. I slid it across the table. Call Detective Miller. I said, ask him who the victim is. Karen picked up the card. She looked at it, then back at me. Leah, she said, her voice softening slightly, but retaining that corporate chill. We value you, but this company handles sensitive logistics data. If there is any question about your financial integrity, there is no question. I said, cutting her off. I am being targeted. This complaint was made by the people attacking me. They are trying to get me fired so I can't afford a lawyer. I stood up. I placed my hands on the table. I have been a model employee for 5 years. I said, I have never missed a deadline. I have never stolen a paperclip. I am fighting for my life right now. I decided to be proactive and tell you this because I have nothing to hide. If you fire me based on an anonymous lie from a criminal, then you are doing their work for them. The room was silent. Sarah finally looked up. Her eyes were wet. She is telling the truth. Karen, Sarah said quietly, I have seen the stress she is under. She isn't a fraud. Karen sighed. She tapped the card on the table. I will verify this with the detective, she said. If you are the victim, then this complaint is harassment. But Leah, keep your drama out of the office. We can't have deputies serving subpoenas in the lobby. I understand. I said. I walked back to my desk. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't type. They had come for my job. They had tried to cut off my livelihood. There was no line they wouldn't cross. I left work early. I couldn't focus. I drove to the sheriff's station again. I needed to know that someone was actually working on the case. I asked for Detective Miller. He came out to the lobby, a man with a tired face and a tie that was slightly askew. He motioned for me to follow him outside, to the smoking area. He lit a cigarette. He didn't offer me one. I got the call from your HR lady, he said. I set her straight, told her you were the complainant. Thank you, I said. I felt a rush of gratitude that was almost pathetic. Look, Ms. Cox, he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. I shouldn't tell you this. It is an active investigation. But after you dropped off that binder, I started making some calls. He looked around the parking lot, as if checking for spies. You aren't the only one, he said quietly. We have had a spike in quick evictions in the county over the last year. He said, mostly elderly folks, people with paid-off houses and no family nearby. They sign a quitclaim thinking it is a refinance or a tax abatement program. Next thing they know, they are being evicted by an LLC they have never heard of. Crown Alder, I asked. Crown Alder, Blue River, Ironwood. It is a network, he said. They flip the houses fast, sell them to investors from out of state. By the time the original owner figures out what happened, the house has been sold twice. It is a title washing scheme. Why hasn't anyone stopped them, I asked. Because the victims are ashamed, Miller said. They are embarrassed that they got scammed. They don't want to admit they signed something they didn't understand. So they take the settlement, they take the relocation assistance, and they disappear. You are the first one who actually filed a hard report with evidence. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. I am not just defending my house. I said, no, Miller said. You are kicking a hornet's nest. These guys, Gavin Pell and his crew, they are making millions. They don't like it when the revenue stream gets interrupted. Watch your back. Ms. Cox. I drove home. The house felt different now. It wasn't just a home. It was a crime scene. It was a piece of evidence in a massive conspiracy. I ate a cold sandwich for dinner standing over the sink. I couldn't sit down. The energy in my body was too jagged. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow I would stand in front of a judge and accuse my parents of being criminals. My phone rang at 9 o'clock. It was Marlene. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I didn't press it. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to know where she stood on the eve of the battle. I answered. I didn't say hello. Leah. Her voice was raw. She sounded like she had been crying for hours. Leah, please, she said. Her voice broke. Please don't do this tomorrow. I listened. I waited. I waited for the magic words. I am sorry. We were wrong. We will fix it. They didn't come. You are going to ruin us. She sobbed. If you go into that court and testify, Derek will go to jail. I turned off the lights. I stood in the center of my living room. I looked at the shadows of the furniture, the couch I had saved for 3 months to buy, the bookshelf my grandfather had built, the walls I had painted a soft dove gray. This wasn't just wood and drywall. It was my autonomy. For 33 years, I had existed with their permission. I had been the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who didn't make waves. I had accepted their conditional love because I thought it was the only kind of love there was. But conditional love isn't love. It is a hostage situation. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The camera I had installed blinked its red eye at me. I was terrified. My hands were cold. My heart was racing. I knew that tomorrow would be ugly. I knew that cross-examination would be a blood sport. I knew that I might lose everything. But as I stood there, watching the empty street, I realized something. I would rather be homeless and truthful than housed and owned. I went to my bedroom. I opened the closet. I picked out my clothes for court. Navy blue suit, white blouse, sensible heels. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I began to write my opening statement. I didn't write it for the lawyer. I wrote it for myself. My name is Leah Cox. I am not a tenant. I am not a child. I am the owner of this house, and I am the owner of my own life. I practiced the words until the shake in my voice disappeared. I practiced until I believed them. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle, waiting for the sun to rise on the day I would finally, irrevocably, become an orphan. The air in the Marrow County Superior Court smelled of floor wax and old paper. A dry bureaucratic scent that did nothing to mask the smell of my own fear. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Rosa, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Across the aisle, at the respondent's table, sat my parents. Derek refused to look at me. He sat with his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in a hard, jutting line, staring fixedly at the judge's empty bench. He wore his Sunday suit, a navy blue jacket that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. A visual reminder of the physical power he had always held in our household. Marlene, however, would not stop looking at me. She sat slightly behind him, clutching a tissue in her hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide, filled with a look of devastation that was almost unbearable to witness. It wasn't anger, it was a profound, wounded accusation. She looked at me as if I were the one holding the knife, as if I were the one who had betrayed the sacred pact of the family. I felt the old conditioning rise up in my throat like bile, the urge to fix it, the urge to walk across the aisle, apologize, and make the tension go away. The voice in my head, the one they had installed, whispered, "Look what you are doing to them. Look how small your mother looks. Is this house really worth destroying them?" I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. I pictured the signature on the quitclaim deed. I pictured the camera footage of the man sliding the threat under my door. I pictured the empty space in the notary log. "Yes," I told the voice. "It is. All rise." The bailiff announced. Judge Harrison entered. She was a woman in her 60s with a stern, intelligent face and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She sat down, adjusted her robes, and looked over the rim of her glasses at the courtroom. "Case number CV 24890, she read. "Crown Alder Holdings, LLC versus Leah Cox, and the counter-motion for emergency stay and quiet title filed by Ms. Cox." She looked at the lawyers. "This is a complex file," she said. "We have an eviction proceeding and a fraud allegation tangled together. I have read the briefs, Ms. Hennigan. You may proceed with your opening on the motion to stay." Rosa stood up. She was small, but in court, she seemed to expand. She didn't use flowery language. She used bricks. She laid them down one by one, building a wall that the other side would have to climb. "Your Honor," Rosa began, her voice clear and steady, "this case appears to be a standard holdover eviction. The plaintiff claims my client is a tenant who has overstayed her lease, but the evidence will show that this is a fiction. Leah Cox is not a tenant. She is the fee simple owner of the property at 404 Elm Street. The lease is a fabrication. The title transfer to the plaintiff is a forgery, and the eviction is the final step in a coordinated scheme to strip my client of her equity." Rosa moved to the easel she had set up. She presented the timeline. January 2023. "Leah Cox buys the home," she said. November 2023. "A quitclaim deed is recorded, transferring interest to Crown Alder Holdings. But look at the signature." She held up the blown-up image of the deed next to my driver's license signature. "The slant is wrong," Rosa said. "The pressure points are wrong. And more importantly, the notary log is wrong." She produced the subpoenaed page from Brenda Miller's journal. The notary admits, under oath in deposition, that Leah Cox was never present. Rosa said, "The signature was notarized as a favor to Derek Cox, the principal of the LLC. I watched the judge." She frowned, leaning forward to look at the exhibit. Rosa didn't stop. She brought up the rerouted mail. She brought up the Juniper Crest loan documents found in my kitchen. She brought up the tax payment made by the LLC before I even knew the bill existed. Each detail was a brick. By the time Rosa sat down, the narrative of family conflict had been buried under the weight of criminal conspiracy. Then it was Gavin Pell's turn. Gavin stood up. He looked immaculate. His suit was tailored, his hair perfect. He didn't look like a predator. He looked like a banker. He looked like the kind of man you trusted with your retirement fund. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth and respectful. "Ms. Hennigan tells a dramatic story, but the truth is much sadder and much simpler." He walked toward the judge, his hands open. "Ms. Cox is a young woman who has struggled with financial instability for years." He said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge with a conspiratorial sympathy. Her parents, my clients, stepped in to help. They created the LLC to protect the asset from her creditors. The transfer of title was an agreed-upon restructuring. Leah signed that deed. She agreed to the lease. She was happy to have the help until she decided she wanted to renege on the deal. He paused, letting the silence hang. "This isn't fraud, Your Honor," he said softly. "This is buyer's remorse. And unfortunately, buyer's remorse is not a defense against a valid eviction order." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Financial instability. It was the lie they had planted. It was the seed from my mother's voicemails. You know how you get overwhelmed. Gavin was using my own life against me. He was turning my parents' controlling behavior into evidence of my incompetence. "Ms. Cox, take the stand," the judge ordered. I walked to the witness box. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down. Rosa walked up to me. "Leah," she said gently, "did you sign the quitclaim deed transferring your house to Crown Alder Holdings number?" I said, "Did you sign a lease agreement with Crown Alder Holdings number? Why did your parents have copies of your keys?" I looked at my parents. Derek was staring at the table. Marlene was weeping into her tissue. "Because I trusted them," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "They are my parents. They told me they wanted a key for emergencies. I gave it to them because I thought they wanted to keep me safe." "And when did you realize that trust was misplaced?" Rosa asked. I looked at the judge. When a deputy sheriff showed up at my door at 6 in the morning, I said, "When I realized that the people who raised me had been planning to evict me for 6 months, when I found out they had taken out a loan against my house that I didn't know about." I took a breath. "I trusted them with my life, Your Honor," I said, "and they used that trust to build a paper trail to steal it." The courtroom went quiet. It wasn't the silence of boredom. It was the silence of shock. It was the sound of people realizing that the monster in the room wasn't a stranger. It was the people sitting in the front row. Rosa sat down. Gavin Pell stood up for cross-examination. He approached me like a shark circling a swimmer. "Ms. Cox," he said, smiling kindly, "you admit you have a history of needing your parents' help. They have helped me in the past." "Yes," I said, "and you admit you have a bank account, a joint account that was used to pay rent to the LLC." "I didn't use it," I said. "They used it. They deposited cash into it and transferred it out to make it look like I was paying rent." Gavin chuckled softly. "So, your parents, who you claim are stealing from you, were depositing their own money into your account. That sounds very generous for thieves, doesn't it?" "It wasn't generosity," I said, my voice hardening. "It was a setup. They were laundering the money to create a ledger. That is a very complicated theory." "Ms. Cox," Gavin said, checking his watch, "isn't it more likely that you simply forgot? That you agreed to this arrangement when you were overwhelmed, and now you are embarrassed?" "No," I said. He leaned in close. "You have been under a lot of stress lately, haven't you, Leah? Your family is worried about your mental state." I looked him in the eye. I saw the threat behind the smile. "Be smart. I am not crazy. Mr. Pell," I said clearly, "and I am not a tenant. I am the owner, and no amount of gaslighting is going to change the name on the original deed." He stared at me for a moment, his smile tightening at the edges. He hadn't expected me to bite back. "No further questions," he said, turning away. Then, it was Derek's turn. My father walked to the stand. He looked big and clumsy in the witness box. He swore the oath. Gavin Pell led him through the easy questions. Yes, he formed the LLC. Yes, he did it to protect Leah. Yes, she signed the deed. Then Rosa stood up. "Mr. Cox," she said, "you claim your daughter signed the deed in front of a notary." "Yes," Derek said. His voice was gruff. "And yet, the notary says she wasn't there." Rosa said, "The notary says you brought the document to her alone." "The notary is confused," Derek said, waving a hand dismissively. "It was a long time ago." Rosa picked up the deed. "Mr. Cox," she said, "in your affidavit, you state that you prepared this deed yourself using a standard form." "That is right," Derek said. I did the paperwork. Leah isn't good with that stuff, and you are familiar with the contents of the deed. I wrote it. Derek snapped. Of course I am. Rosa flipped to the second page. Can you explain to the court why the deed includes a clause 17, referencing a spousal waiver for a woman who is unmarried? Derek blinked. He shifted in his seat. It is a standard form, he muttered. I didn't read every little line of the boilerplate. Rosa paused. She looked at the judge. You didn't read every line, she asked, but in your deposition last week, when asked about the waiver of trial by jury in the lease, you specifically cited Clause 17 as proof that you were thorough. Derek's face turned red. I know what I signed, he stammered. But you just said you didn't read it. Rosa pressed. Which is it, Mr. Cox? Did you draft a document you didn't read? Or are you citing clauses from a document you didn't write? I know what the deal was, Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the rail. She gave us the house she owed us. We raised her. The outburst rang through the room. The judge looked at Derek. Her face was unreadable. Mr. Cox, she said calmly. Did you or did you not sign Leah Cox's name to that deed? Derek looked at Gavin. Gavin was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. Derek looked at me. He saw that I wasn't shrinking. He saw that I wasn't looking down. She was supposed to sign it. He mumbled. It was the same thing. A gasp went through the gallery. The judge took off her glasses. You are stepping down. Mr. Cox, she said. She turned to the lawyers. I have heard enough to make a ruling on the emergency motion, she said. She picked up her gavel. The court finds that the plaintiff, Crown Alder Holdings, has failed to meet the burden of proof required for a summary eviction. Furthermore, the testimony provided today raises significant and credible questions regarding the validity of the title transfer. She looked at me. Ms. Cox, your motion for an emergency stay is granted. The sheriff is ordered to cease all eviction enforcement immediately. You are to remain in possession of the property. I let out a breath I had been holding for 2 weeks. However, the judge continued, looking at Derek, I am referring the evidence of the notary log and the signature discrepancies to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud and perjury, and I am ordering a separate evidentiary hearing to adjudicate the quiet title action. This is not over. Untangling this ownership will take months, but nobody is being locked out today. She banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The room erupted in noise. Rosa squeezed my arm. We did it, she whispered. He admitted it. He cracked. I looked across the aisle. Gavin Pell was already packing his briefcase. He didn't look at Derek. He walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. Derek sat in the witness box for a moment, looking stunned. Then he stood up and walked heavily toward the exit. He walked past me. He didn't look at me. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment I stopped being an asset. But Marlene stopped. She was trembling. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't clasp her purse. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and pity. She stepped close. I tensed, expecting a slap or a scream. Instead, she leaned in and whispered, He has another debt, she hissed. I froze. What, Gavin? She whispered. It wasn't just the loan on your house. Derek owes Gavin's people for the shop. They have a lien on the business. She looked at the door where Gavin had exited. He told us if we delivered the house, he would wipe the debt on the shop, she said. He told us it was the only way out. Now we didn't deliver. She looked at me, and a tear tracked through her heavy makeup. He isn't just greedy. Leah, she whispered, he is trapped, and now he is going to lose everything. She turned and ran after my father. I stood there in the aisle. The victory, which should have felt sweet, tasted like ash. He is trapped. I didn't know if it was true. It could be another manipulation, another attempt to make me feel guilty, to make me responsible for their ruin, or it could be the truth. My father, the man who thought he was a tycoon, was just another desperate mark in Gavin Pell's ledger. It didn't matter. I realized with a sudden clarity that it didn't matter. Whether he was a villain or a victim, he had still chosen to sacrifice me. Let's go, Rosa said. I drove home alone. The afternoon sun was shining, but the world felt different. I was different. I had walked into fire and come out the other side. I was scorched, yes, but I was still standing. I pulled into my driveway. I looked at the house. It was mine. The judge had said it. Possession of the property. I walked up the porch steps. I reached for my keys. Then I stopped. The front door was slightly ajar. I looked at the lock. The new deadbolt I had installed. It wasn't broken. It wasn't scratched. It had been picked, or opened with a master key. My heart hammered in my throat. I pushed the door open with my foot. "Hello," I called out. Silence. I walked in. The house was still. The sunbeams danced on the floor. I checked the living room. The TV was there. The laptop was there. I ran to the kitchen. I checked the cabinet above the fridge, the place where I had found the folder with the Juniper Crest loan documents, the folder I had put back after making copies for Rosa, thinking it was safer to leave it where they thought it was hidden. I pulled up the shelf liner, empty. I checked the drawers. I checked the counter. The folder was gone. I ran to the guest room where I kept my file box. I opened it. The copies I had made were there, but the originals, the ones with the wet signatures, the ones that proved the physical link, were gone. I walked back to the front door. Nothing of value had been taken. My jewelry was on the dresser. My electronics were untouched. Someone had come in while I was in court. Someone knew I would be gone. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for. It wasn't my parents. My parents were in the courtroom, falling apart. It was the network. It was Gavin Pell's cleanup crew. They were erasing the trail. They were cutting the loose ends. They knew the judge had referred the case to the DA, and they were making sure that when the investigators came, the physical evidence connecting Juniper Crest to the fraud would be missing. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the street. Marlene's whisper echoed in my head. "He is trapped." I realized then that the eviction was just the surface. I had won the battle for the house, but I had stepped into a war with something much larger than my dysfunctional family. I looked at the lock. I would have to change it again. I would have to get an alarm. I would have to get a dog. But as I stood there, feeling the cold breeze on my face, I didn't feel afraid. I felt a strange, cold calm. They had taken the folder, but they hadn't taken me. I walked out onto the porch and closed the door firmly behind me. I listened to the latch click. It was a solid sound. I was Leah Cox. I was the owner of this house, and I wasn't going anywhere. I sat down on the porch swing. I watched the sun go down over Redmont Ridge. I watched the shadows lengthen. My parents were gone. The illusion of family was gone. The safety of ignorance was gone. But the house was still standing, and so was I. I took out my phone. I deleted the contact for Dad. I deleted the contact for Mom. Then I opened a new note. Task list 1. Change locks. 2. Call Detective Miller about the break-in. 3. Live my life. I looked at the street one last time. "Bring it on," I whispered to the empty air. Thank you for listening to this story. Writing Leah's journey has been an intense experience. We often think of home as a safe place, but sometimes the danger comes from the people who have the keys. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Do you think Leah should try to save her parents from Gavin? Or is she right to walk away? And where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want more realistic, high-stakes family dramas, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. There are many more secrets to uncover. Until next time, protect your peace.